right, so good morning, everyone. May I have your attention, please? I'd like to call the meeting to order. Councillor Frakadakis, good morning. Good morning. Welcome. We do have quorum, and I know that there's been some work on the projection screen. Are we all good? Excellent, fantastic. All right, so all right, so thank you very much. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Madam Clerk, before I proceed, I wanted to remind us that Councillor Kelly will be here shortly. He did inform us that he'll be a few minutes late. So, welcome to meeting number 15 of the Economic Development Committee. Welcome to the members of the committee and to other members of council in attendance. I see no other member of councils, but they may show up a little later. And so for those of us who are in the room, there's a screen at the very back to my right of the room which provides real-time updates concerning where we are on the agenda and the item that will be coming up next. You can also follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. I'd also like to remind everyone, and this is extremely important, the Economic Development Committee greatly acknowledges that its meeting taking place this morning is being done on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and also home to many diverse Indigenous people. So I wanted to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional territory lands of the Mississauga and the new First Nation. All right, so moving right along, are there any declaration of interest under the or conflict of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interests Act? Looking around the table, I see none. Thank you. Confirmation of the minutes of the September 19th meeting. Okay. Councillor Frakadakis is moving that. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And before I proceed further with respect to the agenda items, I would like this morning to welcome our newest draft choice for the Economic Development Team Economic Development Toronto, none other than number one draft choice, Michael Ford. Councillor Ford, welcome to Economic Development Committee. Councillor Ford,
the hazing at lunch hour, Mr. Chair?
That's right, exactly. That continue. Councillor Carroll, you think you've got that all prepared? Councillor Ford, I use a bit of a sports analogy because the really cool thing about economic development, it's apolitical. We're here to focus on interests of, of a magnitude to affect business development, foreign direct investments, and all of those things to provide those who are interested in terms of doing business in Toronto with an understanding of the landscape, and those who are here doing business with a further understanding of the landscape and how we can collaborate and so on. So I welcome you to Economic Development. We look forward to your input, and I know I join all my colleagues in wishing you well here on the committee. You're going to have fun. So great. Excellent. All right, so there are...
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councillor?
If I could have just a moment, a point of privilege?
Yes.
Before we start the agenda, that's all right? Okay.
Please.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I've been hosting, Mr. Chair, as you might know, business roundtable meetings now for the past several years. And of course, the reason for that was, for doing that, is to help business identify problems, find solutions to their problems, and provide very helpful information as well. So my 10th and most recent roundtable meeting took place on October the 12th at the Toronto Congress Centre, and that meeting focused on Brexit and its impacts on Canadian and local businesses. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank the City of Toronto Economic Development and Cultural Division's Business Retention Department and Expansion Unit, of course, for all the wonderful help. And Mike, you were there, and I thank you so much for being there. It was very helpful to have your presence at that meeting. And I just want to highlight that we had a panel we had a keynote speaker. The keynote speaker was Kevin McGurgan. He's the Counsel General and Director General for UK Trade and Investment in Toronto. Our moderator was Janet Ecker, President and CEO of the Toronto Financial Services Alliance. And we had a pretty impressive panel as well. Andrew Grantham, Senior Economist, CIBC, Nicholas Tadany, President and CEO, Global Equity Markets, Ian Howcroft, VP, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, John Allen, VP, Global Public Affairs, and Vasu Dagapati, Manager, Trade Strategy and Intelligence, Ontario Ministry of International Trade. And to them, I thank them all for being at the meeting. It was a very informative meeting, very productive meeting. And thanks everyone again at Economic Development staff for your help and assistance at that meeting. That's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And I just want to add my voice of thanks and thank you for your leadership on this. It is extremely important work that's being done. Thank you. Okay, so members, we have a couple of presentations. And so any additional communications, Madam Clerk?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, so moving right along, I just wanted to vet through the agenda. We actually have a very small agenda today, so I think that we are looking really good in terms of the hazing Councillor Carroll at lunchtime, all right, so for Councillor Ford. And we're only kidding, by the way, just for those who may be listening, we're only kidding. So ED 15.1, we have a presentation. It's the Workforce Development Toronto's Evolving Landscape. Ms. Wolcott has a number of guests here that she will be introducing shortly, so I will just hold this for the moment. All right, ED 15.2, review of internet connectivity and advancing Toronto as a smart city. This is listed here as an action item. We have a speaker. Ralph Idams is here, Managing Director of Civic Smartscape, is here to speak to that item. I want to personally welcome Mr. Idam, and I'll speak to that a little bit further as we move along in the agenda. ED 15.3, transportation food products in and out of Toronto. So transporting food products in and out of Toronto. I don't have a speaker per se, but I know that Mr. Bill Wallace is actually here from Route, who actually spoke to this some time ago. Mr. Wallace is shaking his head, indicating that he's very happy with the recommendations. Councillor Frakadakis is moving the recommendations, and I also wanted to thank Councillor Carroll for pointing out what we've actually arrived at in terms of our recommendations and so on. So very helpful. So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wallace. And thank you to the staff for an excellent report and coordinating the activities and reaching out to the different groups that they needed to reach out to. ED 15.4, promoting cycling tourism in Toronto. Sure. That's fine, Councillor. That's fine. We have a very short agenda anyway. So Councillor Frakadakis is holding that particular item. And ED 15.5, which is Toronto's Economic Bulletin. I'd like to hold that. I had a couple of questions.
Yeah, I have some questions there in the tourism realm, so I was going to do the same thing. I don't
Right.
need the whole presentation. I've sort of flagged
Yeah,
it
just
with
questions.
GM.
Okay, that's great. I will hold that in my name, Councillor, and we'll get to that. Now, we also have an additional item, which is a new business. It's a memo from Councillor Carroll. Members, it's on the pink sheet. I hope that you have received it, and I'd like to introduce this as a new business item. So, okay, fine, it's coming around. So all those in favor of the introduction of this memo from Councillor Carroll? Yeah. Okay, opposed, that's carried. Okay, thank you. So you'll have an opportunity to read it, and we will deal with this a little later because it is now part of the agenda item for this morning's committee meeting. Okay, so moving right along, I will now take us back to the beginning. ED 15.1, Workforce Development, Toronto's Evolving Landscape. Ms. Wolcott, can I ask you to take the lead in this, please?
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite our speakers to come to the front panel. So today we've arranged to hear from individuals who have detailed knowledge of particular aspects of workforce development. I'll be introducing them shortly as soon as they get settled. And following their presentations, I'll provide an overview of major actions and key achievements since the introduction of the Workforce Development Strategy Working as One. And based on the work to date and the changing context, outlining next step that TESS and the city will be taking. So to kick off today's discussion, I'd like to welcome, first of all, speaker number one, John McLaughlin. John is the Director of Policy and Planning at the Toronto Workforce Innovation Group. He has a long and distinguished career in education and training, both in Canada and internationally. Today, he'll provide an overview of recent developments in workforce development, provincial labor market context, and highlighting effective programs and emerging best practices. Our second speaker is Sandy Houston, who is the President and CEO of the Metcalfe Foundation. Over the last 10 years, Sandy has led the development of Metcalfe into a leading private foundation engaged in helping Canadians imagine and build a just, healthy, and creative society. Today, Sandy will talk about the recent launch of the Toronto Sector Skills Academy and how building leadership capacity to lead employer-driven sectoral training strategies will accelerate the development of a more effective workforce system. And our third speaker is Karen Myers. Karen is the Principal Research Association of the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation. She has over 10 years of experience in conducting policy-relevant research in the areas of social policy, human capital investment, and labor markets. Today, Karen will speak about the context surrounding major infrastructure investments being made in the Toronto region, and will outline the steps being taken to develop a construction sector pathway to train, prepare, and connect interested job seekers to careers in construction and trades. So over to you.
You have 4 people there. You've introduced 3. Oh, okay. She is operating the equipment. Is that what you're? And you are? May I? Hi, Christine. Welcome.
I'm
So
sorry.
now everybody's been introduced.
Yes, that's right. There is four people
It's
there.
about equity here.
Christine's a member of my staff
Thank you.
and responsible for many aspects of our presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Economic Development Committee. We look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank goodness that Christine is here, because I can talk about disruptive technology. I just can't actually do it. So hitting a clicker is not amongst my skill sets. I'd like to thank the city, and in particular Toronto Employment and Social Services, for inviting me to speak today. And I've had an opportunity, gosh, I always feel like I'm dating myself and I should walk into a room with a walker, but I've been around in employment and training for nigh on 30 years. And I have to say, and I don't say this to get bonus points, not that I'd know what I'd do with them if I did, but I've had an opportunity to work in different jurisdictions with different levels of government, and Toronto Employment and Social Services is one of the best group of civil servants I've had to deal with over the years. And I think they deserve hearty congratulations for the effort and work and innovation that they've brought to the area of workforce development. Very quickly, TWIG, or Toronto Workforce Innovation Group, is one of 26 local boards funded by the province of Ontario that are across Ontario. In particular, TWIG focuses on 3 elements: economic mobility for citizens, labor market dynamics, how is economic development and workforce development working together, and we also examine industry trends. What are the jobs of the future? So one of the items I've been working on for the past several years, and more recently, we're doing some background work for the new Ontario Centre for Workforce Innovation, and I was really pleased to see our founding chair here, Wendy Souquier, today. So she'll keep me a little bit honest. And one of the things when it comes to workforce development is we've got this whole pesky issue of evidence, right? What actually works and what doesn't work. And so these are some of the things that we don't know and what we know. So as part of the work I've been doing, reviewed just about every workforce document I could get my hands on, and with the team I was working on, to try and see what were effective practices, what were not effective practices, and what things had evidence. We also examined lots of data that was available about how Ontario's labor market in different regions of the province were functioning. We also did key informant interviews with a variety of stakeholders to try and bring some better understanding and depth to the things that we saw in the research. And we didn't just talk to folks in Toronto and Ontario, but also in other jurisdictions as well. The final piece was to take a look at sort of an asset map, and I'm doing this all the time here in the context of the City of Toronto. Who's being helped and who's not being helped? And there's a variety of different stakeholders, whether they're groups of job seekers or particular industries. So, why is it important? Why is workforce development important? First off, human capital, i.e. the skills that we have, is a really important asset when it comes to economic development. And this is something that the City of Toronto has. When you look at large metropolitan areas, Toronto's human capital may be its greatest strength. It's also important because we have rapidly changing labor markets that place a premium on skills, knowledge, and adaptability. We're also facing, as many councillors and others know, a whole range of disruptive technology. Uber is a great example of how it's shaking up jobs, economics, and consumer practices. And of course, workers and workforce development has to react quickly to these changes. It's important because Toronto has challenges and opportunities when it comes to its demographics. Toronto's very lucky in that it doesn't have to struggle with what other jurisdictions have to: youth. Many small towns and even medium cities across Ontario are dying just because of age, right? So one of our other assets is youth. So what have we learned? The reality is the evidence on the effectiveness of programs and practices is mixed. We know that our system is not yielding optimal results for employers, and we hear this all the time: skills mismatch, skills shortages, whatever way in which we want to frame them. We know that employers are not entirely satisfied with the workers or potential workers that they have. We know that economic development and workforce development have often evolved in separate universes. Now, there's good work going on to try and braid those things together. And I think that that's probably been the largest shift over the last 5 years in terms of the way in which we think about workforce development, in particular job seekers. And finally, we know that those who are receiving income support, that certain groups, whether it's Ontario Works or ODSP, end up being and relying on it, certain subpopulations, far too long. We need to find better ways of moving those folks into the labor force. So what things have promise? So we know that in jurisdictions and places that focus on data, and data not just in terms of accountability, right? Because too often programs, institutions, when they hear the word data, they think about accountability, not necessarily about program improvement and longer-term impact, particularly for clients and employers. We know that integrated and hybrid programs that just don't focus on skills development or just focus on job search or focus on mentoring, but when they bring those things together, they seem to have a higher level of effectiveness. Programming that supports clients to get a job, and this has been a primary focus of workforce development over the last 20 years. But now I think there's getting to be a broader thinking that we have to not only support people to get a job and realize if we're an agency or a service, that our job doesn't end there. That the responsibility may be able, particularly for harder to serve clients and more barriered groups, to help them keep the job. Programs and systems that give the right people the right kinds of supports. Right? So not all populations need the same supports. And finally, and I think my colleagues Sandy and Karen will be able to extrapolate on this a bit more, sectoral programs. Sectoral programs are those that focus on a specific industry. And I won't get into detail because my colleagues will as well. And there we go. I stuck to my 5 minutes, which many around me will be going, that's a miracle.
Okay, thank you. Members, I think it would be better for us to have all the presenters present, and then we'll collectively ask questions of each. Okay? Are we okay with that?
Yeah, we'll switch.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Next, please. So, Sandy, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Just getting my briefing on how the technology works.
All right.
Have to do. Like John, very limited in that space. So good morning, my name's Sandy Houston. I'm the president and CEO of the Metcalf Foundation. We are a foundation that's based here and largely focused on the success of this region. We have 3 basic areas of focus, and there's a slide that tells you a little bit about that. We're fundamentally concerned with poverty reduction, the sustaining of creativity and culture, and the environment, particularly a more low-income economy. We come at that through a variety of strategies and programs, grants programs, research and policy work, focusing on sustaining dynamic leadership, nurturing new ideas and practices, and critically fostering integrated thinking and approaches to perennial problems. And the thing that I want to talk to you about today is an initiative that we recently, very recently launched called the Toronto Sector Skills Academy, and it focuses on trying to make a specific contribution to some of the challenges around workforce development that John has just talked about. But I thought as a first step, I'd just sort of flag the ways in which we think that this program can be a specific kind of enhancement or addition to some of the specific objectives of some of the recent work the City of Toronto has done on this issue. And I put this slide up because it flags the importance of some of the elements of the challenge, which are better connecting employers and candidates, creating better gateways for employers, being more specific in customizing approaches, and critically creating pathways to better jobs and livable incomes. And that's what we are really concerned with. So when we looked at the landscape of all the good work that's being done in the city, it seemed to us that there was another piece that we could possibly contribute, looking at models largely from the United States. So the initiative that I'm talking about is something called a sector-based approach, and John touched on that. It's thinking a little more about industry-specific needs and looking at trying to bring a perspective and set of strategies to leaders across the spectrum to think about how to better address two fundamental things, particularly with regard to low-income workers. First, raising the floor, in other words, creating better jobs at the bottom of the job landscape, and then within the job market, building ladders so that people have some better prospect of mobility within their workforce over time. And those two elements, in many people's opinion, are critical to a better workforce. And you can see within that slide, it's a bit small, but at the bottom, it tries to identify some of the elements of what a more successful and sustainable job landscape looks like. So the language is a bit obscure, so I thought I'd put a slide up on this. When we talk about sector, we're really talking about a specific industry or a set of occupations. And the reason that this is important in the context of our conversation is it's well recognized that business competitiveness and workforce needs need to better intersect. But I think what John was referring to as the braiding of the interests of employers, employees, and the city and its success. One way that can happen is through the creation of workforce intermediaries. This approach, which is not ours, we did not develop this, we brought it up from the United States, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's really not a model, it's a strategy. It's trying to provide people with a way of thinking about a set of problems and a vision, which we think, and it seems to have been demonstrated in the United States, will yield a more successful outcome, resulting in employers being more satisfied with the set of workers that come into the workforce, workers getting better and more sustainable jobs, and ultimately, more ambitiously, our system starting to do this work better at a large scale than we are at present. So the Toronto Sector Skills Academy, which is this thing that we have just launched, what is that? It's essentially a gathering of leaders in public sector, civil society, the private sector, who will be given a comprehensive set of trainings over the course of 10 months to help them think about the work that they do in this different way. The hope is it will improve the quantity, quality, and sustainability of sector efforts on the ground, develop the competencies and leadership of senior managers to use these approaches, and strengthen their organization's capacity to achieve longer change, to create a learning community within this big sector that thinks about these issues all the time, strengthen networks, and champion these strategies as a framework for workforce development and poverty reduction. So those are the goals. They're big goals. The way this has been manifested so far is that we sent out an invitation through the whole sort of world of workforce development in Toronto and said, here's a remarkable opportunity to receive a training that comes out of the United States that the foundation will largely subsidize and deliver. Please apply. We got a very robust round of applications. These are the 24 people who've been selected to be the first cohort. I'm pleased to tell you that within that cohort are 4 members of Toronto Employment and Social Services. So we're very pleased to have strong representation from the city within the first cohort, as well as somebody from the ministry, as well as people from civil society. We have had great support from the city throughout this. Pat Walcott is on our advisory committee. Joe Mannion assists us with the selection process. And as I say, 4 managers from TESS are in the first cohort. So we're delighted to see the city's great support and enthusiasm for the initiative. I thought I would just very briefly tell you a little bit about what we know about this from the United States. So this is a program of an organization called the Aspen Institute, which is a very well-regarded organization in Washington that thinks about building leadership and new approaches around ideas and policy on important issues of social policy. They've been delivering this program in the United States for about 10 years. Last year, they decided that they would disseminate what they've learned in the model that they've built across the United States and into Canada. Toronto is the first instance of this model leaving the United States. Metcalf invested in sending some leaders down to take the program, as well as one of our staff. We were then chosen by Aspen to deliver the program here. Aspen's being extraordinarily generous in giving the curricula, giving accreditation. The fellows who take this program will be called Aspen Fellows, which is quite an honor in the United States, and I think it will become that here. So they have essentially said, we think we've got a pretty robust model. We're going to disseminate it. So they've put it into a number of cities in the United States to make it a regional strategy, and now they're trying it in Canada with Toronto. We think it has enormous potential, not just for Toronto, but other cities in Canada, but this is the test case, and this cohort that starts in 2 weeks are sort of the guinea pig group for establishing the Canadian viability of what's been a strong model in the United States. The lessons from the United States are essentially on that slide, and I'm not sure all of them are going to have quite the same weight here. Private philanthropy has played an enormous role in the United States, and as many of you know, private philanthropy generally plays a larger role in the United States than it does in Canada. We'll probably need different partners here, but a lot of the initial heavy lifting was done by large foundations in the United States. They have focused on pursuing changes in public policy and funding as the lessons emerge out of the quite practical delivery of training. They have focused on trying to build practice from the ground up, looking for new approaches and new thinking, and then incorporating that into their pedagogy and their strategies. They focus on building the evidence base, as John talked about, and that remains a challenge here that we'll have to think about. And then they think about seeding new organizations and institutions to carry some of the implications of this way of thinking about the work forward. And that's it for me. I'm happy to, we'll take questions at the end, and I'm happy to follow up with any of you if you want further information on any of this. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you for your presentation. Karen?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be here. So I'm going to talk about a real-life example of a sector-based approach that has been designed and developed with a very large collaboration of players that is about to emerge in the city of Toronto. So this is a construction sector pathway. It's very tightly aligned with the city's workforce development strategy, sector-based, dual customer approach, so both the job seeker and the employer are the customer in this model. It is going to pilot test a really promising approach to integrated service delivery, and as John highlighted the importance, it's an evidence-informed model, and we are very grateful to the investment in this sector-based approach because we're going to need all the help we can get, because I think we are really breaking ground with this model. I'm going to talk a little bit about the approach, the multi-sector co-design approach we used to develop the model. What's really important is the original impetus for this construction sector pathway was the Eglinton Crosstown and the community benefits framework that was developed for this approach. So the need was to develop a workforce development solution to serve this community benefits framework. But then with the passing of the Ontario Jobs and Prosperity Act and the increased profile it brought to community benefits, the potential scope for the pathway and its importance expanded significantly. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the problem that this pathway was trying to solve. John pointed to some of the gaps in our evidence and our knowledge about what works, and so we took a really close, detailed look at the state of workforce development in Toronto. We did extensive consultations with employment service providers, with employers in the construction industry, with union representatives and trades training centers, and asked what's working well and where are there gaps. So we have a long list of gaps related to the current state. I won't go through them all. You've got the presentation for your reference, but just to highlight a couple. Some of the really key things were really incomplete information about the construction sector and jobs in the construction sector. So people know that there are good jobs in the construction sector, but it's complicated. And with unions involved and the specific nuances of the construction sector, it was very hard for employment service providers to actually advise job seekers and help them understand what they need to do to prepare and create that talent pipeline for employers in the construction sector. Challenges related to case management, we identified some specific gaps in services, and some real challenges with stops and starts in programming, so it was taking quite a long time, especially for job seekers that were most vulnerable and may have multiple service needs. Supports, financial and non-financial supports being disjointed, and also limited opportunities to provide that wraparound life skills coaching. Uncoordinated employer engagement. This is a big problem. Employers telling us that there were multiple providers knocking on their door and then not actually having a clear value proposition to offer. And then once people are on the job, not being able to provide that retention and advancement support to really secure the investment was made and make sure that things go smoothly for both the job seeker and the employer. And then limited monitoring and evaluation. So we started talking about, well, how could we change this? And together created a vision for a future state that was both ambitious but actionable. So one-stop access, wraparound approach to case management, comprehensive but customizable menu of services, integrated, concurrent, accelerated programming, access to supports that's seamless, and something we're really excited about was a wraparound life skills coaching support so that job seekers were really, really well supported and can continue to make progress, and one-stop coordination for employers. This we heard over and over again was key. And one of the things that I need that employers can go, there's a labor market intermediary, they can get all of their needs met in one place without having to deal with multiple service providers. So what does that actually look like from an employer standpoint? The intermediary is one-stop point of coordination dedicated to helping employers meet their needs, and that the pathway actually provides a pipeline of suitable and well-prepared job seekers. So with this vision in mind, we looked at who do we need to bring to the table. So we started with community, Toronto Community Benefits Network, numerous community organizations and employment service providers. We got employers at the table. We started with Crosslinks. Since they are the lead for the Eglinton Crosstown, they are first in our pipeline of employers we want to be able to serve. But we also look more broadly to others in the construction industry because we know we're just getting started with infrastructure projects and the big move. And we also brought unions to the table from the very beginning. All of the building trades unions are at the table, and extensive consultations with their trades training centers, and a number, really critically, a number of supporting organizations, the United Way of Toronto and York Region, Metcalf Foundation, and the Atkinson Foundation as well too. And that group really brought leadership to the table and helped convene all of these players from different sectors and different interests together working in one direction. And City of Toronto, Ontario government, and Metrolinx were also at the table, and my organization, SRDC, provided technical support for the whole process. So where we landed was a design for a pathway with 3 specific goals. First, to provide opportunities for vulnerable job seekers. Second, to meet employer needs. And third, to test a collaborative sector-based model of working. In terms of pathway scope, and this is something we're really excited about, is that the pathway is set up to serve any employer who seeks to hire job seekers experiencing economic disadvantage, discrimination, and/or barriers to equal opportunity. And we envision multiple leverage points for this, including all of the city's revitalization projects, community benefits projects, and social procurement opportunities. And the pathway will both prepare and match job seekers for both trades and non-trades construction jobs. So again, this is a fairly big scope. In terms of the specific target population, The pathway is designed to serve all residents of Toronto experiencing economic disadvantage with a special focus on low-income youth. And this is a policy priority that is important for both the City of Toronto and the province as well. And to conclude, in terms of key pathway features, demand-informed, always starting with what the employer needs are and using a labor market intermediary approach, responsive to job seekers and community, taking an integrated service delivery or what we call a pathways approach, collaborative systems building, and a commitment to operational excellence and learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, all three, and your able assistant. All right, so members, questions? Councillor Ford, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the panel for their presentation this morning. And my question isn't directed to any member of the panel specifically, but more specifically to unemployment in the City of Toronto. And youth, or maybe I'll do this in 2 steps here. So when you're looking at workforce development, Toronto is home to a wide range of diverse communities across our city. And I heard the panel talk very high level about the Toronto region. Have you gone more specific into communities that face different challenges?
I can start. Certainly that was the very first starting point for the construction sector pathway project. There was a partnership with a large number of community organizations in priority neighborhoods across the Eglinton crosstown. A number of community meetings were held and discussions to identify interest in construction sector jobs and help understand what the existing experiences, skill sets were and strengths, and where there might be gaps and what would be needed from an employment service perspective to help prepare and connect individuals. So deeply rooted in community from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a critical point. I like to identify this as how I spent my summer vacation 2015. I went and talked to, gosh, I think it was ended up being over 400 job seekers across the city. And I probably learned more from talking to actual job seekers. In particular, I tried to focus on those who might be classified as longer term unemployed. And a good proportion of them are youth. And I learned an awful lot. And I may be going a little against some of the more common themes out there. But most of the youth I met with, and it was well over half, by and large, had fairly optimistic outlooks. No matter, sometimes I was actually less optimistic than they were, right? Amazingly resilient. I ended up being far more concerned at the end of it about older workers. Particularly single male older workers over the age of 45. And so I actually then decided to go back and look at the data, right? Because you heard maybe something different than what I was hearing as common narratives. And then I went and looked at the data and I went, because some of these men and women I talked to were like, I'm done, man. A 47-year-old guy who had worked in a warehouse and had been replaced by a robot, going to me, I'm done, man. Like, the odds of me getting employed, I'm better off buying Lotto 649 tickets. And then going back to the data, and yeah, actually, we are going to need to refocus some of our energies to other populations aside from youth. There, sorry, my long-winded answer.
Thank you. And then kind of bridging off youth unemployment specifically, you spoke about skills-based and training for the workforce. Are we partnering with the Ministry of Education or school boards or the work that you're doing to connect with our youth?
Are you talking to me?
The panel.
Yes, so the approach for the construction sector pathway is to bring together a number of service providers who are operating in the skills development space. So that includes literacy, basic skills, academic upgrading, and also includes the types of programming that's offered by TESS currently, and then figuring out how can we integrate that and make that a good, comprehensive but customizable package for youth. You raise a really good question about the K to 12 and ensuring that there's good understanding of what the opportunities are out there, and so that's really key as well too.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Carroll to question next.
Yes. Well, a question for the Aspen program, but also for, then I want to get into a little bit of the our own internal operations. Are we leaving it up to the people taking the course that are inside the City of Toronto's operations, or is there an overall look at how do we access the people that aren't going to come looking for this? How do we get to the people who are chronically or generationally on OW and in housing, who don't know that this is waiting for them? So they're not even coming to ask OSAP about school. They're not even coming to ask about this. They're not coming to ask about construction. Is that being looked at within the overall Metcalf strategy, or are you just sort of leaving that to us?
That's a very good question. I mean, this particular program is aimed at leaders, people who have the ability to implement and create policy. So it's quite a specific strategy around who is selected. People who have the capacity to make change within their own organizations, and ideally at a level of policy or structural change, most ambitiously. So for the lens for this particular program, it's quite a specific constituency of fairly senior people across the sectors.
Right.
Beyond that, I mean, taking that down to the level where it actually has impact is probably going to be a conversation within that classroom, but it's not the specific focus at the outcome. I mean, at the end of the day, most of the organizations that are interested in this kind of undertaking are ultimately interested in affecting lives within communities on the ground, and all of these strategies are effective to the degree they do that. And I think part of the question will be emerging out of this is how do organizations better connect to the constituencies they want to connect to, and how do the implications of whatever it is they've learned at the academy actually affect the way they do their work, both at the level of macro policy and with specific people within community.
Right, right. So turning to our operation, how do we tackle this program? Because in looking at John's presentation and all of them really, it's written in our language, it's in policy and high-level management language, but on the ground, how do we tackle that? The youth we're trying to reach, and really, in fact, their families in terms of the rest of the people, the other percentages within this group, I sort of see them as there's that rare kid who tackles this as I got to get out of here. How am I getting out? And then there's a whole huge group that's I would like to get out, but I can't get out of poverty, and my mom and dad have told me why I can't get out of poverty. In terms of what to do next, how to go to school and how to get the job, if it's a generational problem or a long-standing time on subsidized income, the person closest to them, the person they're asking for what's my next step, actually doesn't know that this is available either, isn't up to date on how nowadays you look for jobs. How do we get to those I'd like to get out folks that aren't walking in our own doors?
So that's exactly the target population, the way you described
Yeah.
it. This construction sector pathway is designed to engage.
So how do you engage? Where do you go get them?
So community organizations are key. One of the most striking things at the beginning of the project was how well it can work for TESS to partner with community organizations that have that reach deep into communities and can bring forward candidates that are keenly interested in working and making a better lives for themselves and their families. And we have a database with 300 residents that are ready and waiting to go for this opportunity.
So do you go looking for the community groups, or do they have to come looking for you?
It's a bit of both. It's a bit putting it out there that this is available, and that part was the easy part.
So
That-
you'd go to Tropicana, you'd go to Harriet Tubman, you reach them, they don't have to come to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there are also, those strategies can be replicated right within TESS as well, too. Like TESS does have that engagement capacity within its own network, so that combined together has worked extremely well. And within that, we see that range of individuals who are actually quite well prepared and have barriers to access, in part because of discrimination and where they live and so on, and then others who need that deeper support, like you talked about, and they're having that wraparound. Life counseling supports is really, really critical feature to ensure that they can, individuals can move forward and be supported as they move forward. So it's a bit of both.
Okay.
Thank you.
If
That's
we
your
have a
5
second
minutes.
round, I have one
Yeah,
more question.
that's fine. I don't know whether or not the general manager wanted to add anything to what was just said by the speaker. Not you, Mike.
Yes, I did want to add a little bit here around the access point. One of the problems is confusion around access because there are so many doors to go through. So one of the objectives here is to have, and I'll talk about it a bit in my presentation, to have a common assessment, to have single points of entry and assessment, and therefore referral into some of these pathways, because that is some of the problem.
Okay, that's fine. We can make that happen, Councillor Carroll. Okay, so moving right along, Councillor Crisante, the question, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. John, I believe you said that in 2015, you had the opportunity to speak to about 400 job seekers. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Was it under what form and how did you identify these job seekers?
Yeah, well, it was actually one of the conditions of my employment at Twig. I said, I think for a long time, different organizations, particularly in the arena of workforce development, talk amongst themselves a lot, right? I had the fortune to be involved with Pathways to Education in its early days and learned when you're talking about helping people, the first place to go is to the people themselves, right? Not to hear from others what their barriers are or challenges, but to talk to them directly. Because sometimes, frankly, the stories are very different. And so I put the word out via email. I mean, we have a subscriber list at the organization of like 2,000 saying, I want to come talk to job seekers. And we scheduled focus groups. I did one-on-one interviews. I think I was in just about every Tim Hortons across the city.
Good.
Talking to clients. And I think, I think I'm fairly consistent on this recommendation everywhere. We need better mechanics in all jurisdictions, in all levels of government, of communicating with the consumers of our service. And not through surveys and forms, but through dialogue in a very deliberate manner. Because, as I said, I don't think the folks I talked to learned anything from me, but I sure as heck learned a lot.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I can't agree with you more. You know, I'm very engaged with my own community, and I speak to a lot of job seekers that they're telling me that they're very frustrated, that they can't get work and they don't know where to go. So, of course, I lead them to the right agencies, TESS, for example, and TESS does a phenomenal job, and you walk into their door, in my opinion, if you want to work, you're going to come out working. And I also, through my business roundtable meetings, I speak to a lot of employers who are also frustrated, who are telling me the opposite, are saying to me, we can't find the people we need to fill our positions. So are you looking at how we can bridge that gap? And then if we do, I think we'll be quite successful in reducing our level of unemployment.
And that's why I think it's, was very happy when I knew Sandy and Karen were going to be speaking today, because they're one of the best examples of what you're raising, that issue about trying to weave the issues of employers and trying to weave the issues of job seekers together. Because, yeah, absolutely, there's this discognizance that's going on between certain levels of job seekers and certain groups of employers. And trying to bridge those is not easy.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm very excited and about what work is going on from Metcalf and others, and to see how 3 years from now it actually turns out. And I'm extremely optimistic.
So if I could just add to that?
Yes, please.
Just to amplify on your point, because I think that is the fundamental point.
Right.
And part of the potential in these new approaches that I was talking about and that Karen was talking about is to focus much more specifically on what the employer actually needs.
Right.
What does that job, what does his business need? What does the industry that he works in need? So that the response from people who are trying to assist people to find jobs is better focused on what employers are actually looking for. And it's the idea of those strategies, sometimes called sectoral strategies, which we think holds real potential, that mismatch, that fundamental misalignment between demand and supply is more aligned and more successful for both sides of the equation.
The city could identify 5 in-demand industrial sectors that were of strategic importance to the city, where there are entry level and then ladders to more decent jobs, and focus on then reaching deep into the employers in those sectors, understanding their needs, and then calibrating employment services to reach deep into job seekers communities and understand who is there, what skills they have, what strengths can be built on, help fill those gaps, and then connect the two. And that's a way of doing both.
Thank you so much. My time's up, so thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions, Councillor. Just a quick question from me. Duplication, how do you avoid that? Because it seems that there is a lot of cross-pollination in terms of the activities that you're performing along with the work that TESS is doing. So how do you segment that? How do you say, well, they're already doing this, so we may do something else? And how do we coordinate all of those activities?
What we did for the construction sector pathway, and that's why the co-design was so critical, we had both TESS and the province at the table. So we had Employment Ontario and TESS there, and we had decision makers and service delivery managers at the table, so we really got that picture. And then we brought the best in from what organizations like the United Way and Metcalf were trying to do in terms of innovation to inspire the system, got the trade centers at the table too, everyone working together. What piece have we already got? What can we bring to the party? And what can we do together that we couldn't do apart? And then how can we use this as a model for systems change? So that was very, very top of mind in our approach.
Fantastic. That's the real question I had. I wanted now to provide an opportunity. So, Patricia, you have an opportunity now. I think members may have some questions of you. Are you planning to do a presentation as well? Okay, so just before you do that, members, if there is a additional question for this panel as a quick second round, I would offer that opportunity now. Or is it questions for staff?
I think my question is actually better placed to ask.
Okay, fair enough then, we can do that. So just a quick question. Are there any other members who wish to ask additional questions of the panel members that are here? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to now offer an opportunity for the General Manager of Economic Development, because there's a absolute coordination, collaboration between TESS and EDC. The General Manager has a question or two publicly that he'd like to ask, and this is unusual, so I'm going to ask members to kind of vary the order per se. but to allow the general manager to ask a question of this esteemed panel, if we may. Okay, all those in favor of that? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Mr. General Manager, Mike Williams, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked this question because I sit as a volunteer on the board of George Brown College, and I'm part of the Academic and Student Affairs Committee of that college. So we spend all our time trying to figure out what courses for George Brown to offer. And as you know, George Brown has a huge construction component to their training. The timeframes, so this is my question, the timeframes to resolve the mismatch between skill sets and demand in the marketplace require a really robust forecast of the skill sets that are needed in the future. How does this Aspen work reflect that need to be looking several years down the road because of the time it takes for a college, which is probably the college and the union training centers are the leading centers to train? How do you deal with this gap in time?
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure I have an excellent answer to that question. To the degree I know what Aspen has been doing, I'm not sure that this initiative has been attempting to forecast labor trends. And you know, the absence of labor market intelligence is a perennial problem. I think what they're trying to do is create better and more cohesive relationships between what employers are actually looking for at the moment and what Employment Services and Workforce Development is doing at the moment. I would hope that out of an initiative like this might come something that's more forward-looking. We have participation within this cohort from the community college sector. They're a critical actor in the space. And this is quite a targeted and specific initiative now, but I would hope that in 2 or 3 years that we're in a better position to start to talk about some of the larger structural challenges in trying to work this way.
Okay, thank you very much. I think your presentations were extremely helpful. It's good to know what is taking place out in the great city. And I'm buoyed with the notion and thought of this collaboration in order to address key fundamental problem that exists in the city. And so I know that the general manager will be coming, and I'm sure that her presentation will fit nicely with respect to the presentation you've given. So on behalf of members of the Economic Development Committee, I want to thank you very much for your ongoing and great work in order to have an impact on the very people that we're all here tasked with the responsibility of giving a helping hand, a hand up, so that they will be able to create opportunities for themselves. So thank you all very much for your presentation. Thank you. And Ms. Wolcott, I'll have you and your team come forward.
No rolling chairs here.
Good morning again.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to really thank the speakers for helping to set up my presentation. And I'd like to thank in advance the chair and the committee for the influence that they've had on our future directions. Because what we're attempting to do here is to talk a little bit about how workforce development is evolving within the city of Toronto based on these people that are influencing us around. So as you know, the primary goal of workforce development is to address the needs of employers and to help residents get jobs. As a result, thousands of employers have accessed talented and qualified candidates. And thousands of job seekers have started a business, begun a new career, found a first job, or gained meaningful work experience. For example, in 2016, we're on track to assist 800 employers and sector partners meet their workforce needs, to help 27,600 clients to either access Ontario Works for employment or start a job placement. We've supported 235,000 employment center visits and developed 197,000 service plans to move people towards their goal. So once they come in our door, we are developing an action plan for them to help them meet their goal. So to achieve this success, the strategy is continually evolving. So I want to highlight a couple of areas in terms of the changing context. First of all, I want to say that our caseload has been dropping. So our caseload right now is trending around 84,500, down from a peak of about 102,000 cases per month. However, the people that we have on the caseload now remain on assistance much longer. They require more intensive supports and a different approach to getting jobs. This means thinking creatively about the services and supports we provide and how we provide them. Second, there are a couple of positive changes at the provincial level that I'd like to highlight. For example, in June, the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities was renamed the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills. So that was an important signal. This change demonstrates the provincial commitment to better integrate employment services and what is required in the labor market as a whole. The highly skilled workforce expert channel, meanwhile, was set up to develop an integrated strategy to help Ontario's workforce adopt to a technology-driven economy. And finally, the province has established an income security reform working group and committed to a basic income pilot. And there will be announcements coming forward on that pilot very shortly. These are important actions that are intended to reduce poverty, help people participate in the economy, and provide services in ways that make sense to people who need them. So, of course, new thinking and practices. So, as John said, we are constantly scanning what are the best practices around workforce development. And there is new thinking and emerging practices from jurisdiction across North America and beyond. And the context may differ, but we all want the same outcomes. So I'll just give one big example of New York City. And in New York, the mayor is leading a shift in the city's approach to workforce development by moving away from a system that focused on rapid job attachment, something that we were often focused on as well, towards developing a career pathway for people so that they don't come back on to our roles. The idea is to build skills based on employer needs, improve access to quality jobs, and enhance system and policy coordination. So more and more, we're thinking not just about the job, but about how to get that first job and how to build their career within that type of employment. So what we've learned, there's a lot we've learned, certainly that we need championships at all levels in order to achieve our goals, both in the community and at tables like this. That we need to make workforce development the way we do business across all of our divisions in the city, for example. That we need to engage directly with industry to identify and address workforce needs. And that not all job seekers and employers require the same level of service. We want to focus career pathways by obtaining what we call stackable industry-relevant credentials. This means building in flexibility for people to get shorter-term credentials or certificates with clear labor market value, even while they continue to build on these skills to advance even more to acquire more advanced jobs and higher wages. For example, Empower, which is an IT training program that we're very involved with, the trainees get a short-term generic boot camp training, and that's recognized by a number of leading IT firms. And then this training is further stacked with additional and more specialized training in the future. So it's the beginning of their career path. Advancing work-based learning by providing hands-on learning is an important strategy within TESS. And this means providing individuals with an opportunity to earn as they learn and get on-the-job training. This approach has proven to be an effective strategy for easing youth transitions from school to work. And the other focus is to try to build seamless interfaces across service providers. There are so many people involved in the labor market outcomes that we need. So trying to get seamless access is a clear objective. So this slide is about the emerging opportunities. I'm not going to cover every point on this slide, but I want to focus on a particular leverage point in particular, the third one, which is about infrastructure redevelopment. This includes public investments such as Toronto Community Housing Revitalization and capital repairs, and private investments such as the Yorkdale Mall expansion and the waterfront revitalization. Earlier this month, the Toronto Region Board of Trade released the Building Infrastructure Building Talent, where they identified a significant economic demand for construction-related workers to support the billions being spent over the next 15 years. So that kind of links to our strategies around construction pathways. As you've heard from one of our panelists, Karen Myers, efforts are underway to develop this much-needed construction and trades-related pathway that will equip residents with the necessary training and support to fill this skills gap. The city currently sits at this table with the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Development and other stakeholders like the United Way. This collaboration is proving to be very, very productive. And there will be an important communication, formal communication, forthcoming in the coming weeks, very, very quickly, actually, that will tell you how this is going to work and how services will be integrated so that people can access services in a seamless way. And I don't think I would be giving anything away by saying that the City of Toronto will be playing a key role here. So the whole focus on system-wise coordination provides strategic avenue for the city to lead by example and support the planning, coordination, and implementation of large-scale hiring and talent pipelines. So I've talked about the construction industry, but we have some other examples as well. I've personally been involved as the general manager at TESS in co-chairing a senior work group with the province of Ontario, which is mandated to advance a common client assessment tool for Ontario, so that clients will come in and get, regardless of where they land, and be assessed in a common way. Shortly, there will be an announcement around this common tool and how it will be utilized in the province, and there will be a detailed data analysis of the outcomes of that tool. Another example I'd like to give is of another division, SDFA, who's leading work establishing the Employment Connections Network. It's an example of how the city has leveraged its connections and coordination capacity in partnership with the Ministry of Children and Youth Services. It organizes an annual job fair for youth on probation or parole, and coordinates ongoing support and skills development. And TESS is supporting this in a very large way as well. And of course, you're familiar with the city's role as an anchor institution. It's about using the city's hiring and purchasing power in more deliberate ways to create opportunities for city residents. One recent example of this is the launch of the city's first work-based learning pilot for youth on Ontario Works. Through this new program, disadvantaged youth will obtain paid work experience over a 5-month period in a variety of roles with a number of city divisions. HR and TESS have been on the forefront of this work. The city's social procurement policy is another notable example, led largely by SDFA with support from other divisions such as TESS and PMMD. The city now has the tools in place to begin using its purchasing power in ways that foster community benefit. And of course, we're using the leverage point of integrating the work of various city divisions and partner organizations. And I always love to give the example, because we've had recent graduations, of our integrated employment and entrepreneurial site at the Crossways Employment Center. And of course, that is a partnership with Economic Development and Culture. In 2016, over 200 starter company grants were provided to young entrepreneurs who primarily receive services support through this new integrated site. And you are all familiar with the opening of our Regent Park Community Center. And TESS has an employment center there, and it's co-located with Dixon Hall, which is an Employment Ontario agency. So it's another example of trying to build a more seamless organization. So leading by example at TESS. So at TESS, we've taken a number of steps to better act on the leverage points I've just identified. It's meant changing how we're structured, what we deliver, what we measure, and who and how we work with key internal and external stakeholders. A few examples of this: we've restructured our existing management resources to more appropriately address emerging business areas. For example, we've been engaging employers a long time. We didn't necessarily have a group of dedicated management that was tasked with this role, and we have restructured to ensure that this happens. And this has significantly changed how we work with the economic developments, sector economic officers, and how we improve our relationships and expertise in areas where there's growing demand and job seeker interest. We are going to be modernizing our services in our 19 employment centers to better reflect who we serve and what can be improved based on emerging areas of opportunity, such as sector-based approaches. And certainly, we're looking at realignment efforts to make sure that we can fulfill our mandate with the construction pathway. Finally, we've continued to engage the experts to better understand emerging areas of opportunities and to share best practices. The Youth Employment Action Advisory Committee is a prime example of this. And next month, you'll be hearing more about their activities. We'll be coming forward with a report to this committee, and the co-chairs will be making a presentation with their recommendation around the next steps for youth action. So the last point that I want to make is that in 2017, TESS will be launching an annual report of workforce development. We are committed to documenting and showcasing our work in workforce development and as a result, we'll be launching this report. The report will highlight the major initiatives we undertake, profile best the employers and sectors and clients that we work with, and describe outcomes achieved in 2016 and set out next steps. It's written, I hope it's written, and designed in an accessible way, and hope that it will become an important means of communicating internally and externally, a new public document. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Are there questions? Councillor Carroll.
Yes. Actually, Vice Chair Kelly mentioned it as well. The federal Minister of Finance was fairly depressing this morning. He basically said, suck it up, millennial buttercups. You're just going to have contract jobs for the rest of your life. That was basically his message. So I hear you talking about moving away from rapid placement to career planning.
Yes.
I hear the province looking at income security reform and piloting basic income. Are we in a crash course with the federal government? Because they don't seem to think they should address this fact of precarious employment, that people should just get with the new reality. But we seem to be trying to overcome it. How do we get them to help us overcome it?
I didn't hear the announcement today, but I'd have to say
It was a toss-off.
I'd have to say that our interests are helping people that are more disadvantaged. I would expect they're looking at a more macro level about the environment as an overall macro situation. But we have to deal with people that are left behind. So I don't think we're on a collision course. I think we're filling in a gap.
But when you say you have 197,000 service plans.
Yes.
The goal of those service plans is not to guarantee that everyone gets a job for 3 months, I would think.
No, absolutely not. No.
You're trying to credential people who've been left behind so they can enter the job market and get a job that's going to last, and
Or at
I would
least put
think
them on a
provide
path.
some level of benefits.
Yes. Or put them on a pathway towards that. Because some people are very, very distant from the labor market. So they need some life stabilization actions first. Childcare, housing, the basics, basic education, and had to have a pathway set out so that they can enter other areas. For example, in the construction industry, there is pre-apprenticeship work that can be done with people to move them towards apprenticeship and then along the pathway.
So we have a stabilized caseload, but it hasn't gone back to pre-GFC level. It's gone. There's a new normal that's in the 80,000 range.
Yes.
We're never going back to the 60,000 range, maybe. But if there is, on top of these hard-to-employ folks, there is a cohort in the same generational demographic who are constantly ending a contract and then going and looking for a stopgap service job. Oh, I'm not an urban planner this week. Now I'm a barista for another couple of months until my next contract. Are they not stealing the jobs from those people that we're trying to create career plans for? And where I'm leading is should we municipally be advocating that long-term employment has to be a goal at all orders of government?
I think you have to redefine what is long-term employment. In some cases, that means many jobs in the same career area. That can be long-term employment. It may not necessarily be with exactly the same employer.
6 or 7 in a career.
Yes.
But the problem is we're hearing 6 or 7 in a span of 2 or 3 years. That wasn't what we intended when we started down this knowledge industry path.
No,
Yes.
that's not the intention. The intention is, at least when you're in these shorter-term jobs, whether they're a year, 2 years, or
Right.
whatever, that job is building skills. It's stacking your skills for your next job.
Right, so you had a more median idea in mind. So one other question, we talked, maybe I'm being a bit previous, because we talked a little bit about this during the budget presentation upstairs, the informal group, but you are moving towards this one access seamless service. Is the goal just to get the services all on one desk, or in that exercise, can there be some work done to correct some of the things in the system that don't work? The example I used was my recent example within my own family of the subsidized childcare system is just bizarre, because you have to be in the job before you can have the subsidized
5 minutes,
space. You
Counselor.
can't get the subsidized space because that takes 4 years, so there you are in OW longer than you want them to be. So can you correct some of those barriers at the same time you're putting all these things into one basket?
Well, that's clearly the objective. The idea is that if you have one access point, you're assessing all the needs at one point, and therefore you can identify the gaps and make appropriate.
The gaps in our system or the gaps in the person's
Okay,
needs?
thank you.
It could be both.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Okay. Councillor Ford. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar to my questioning for the panel, I did hear you mention quite a bit about working with the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skill Development, which is great. And you also mentioned that what we're trying to do in TESS is help people who can't get a job and who have challenges getting a job, and people to get a first job. And that a lot of youth graduating doesn't necessarily carry on to post-secondary. So are we working with the Ministry of Education to help prep students and youth for the workforce in terms of K to 12?
So you're talking about people that are in high school and
That's
do not access community colleges, et cetera?
Right.
They
Because
will,
those, in my opinion, are some of our most challenged.
yes, that is a difficult situation, because right now in the economy, people require specialized skills. So we will have to provide them with some kind of skills training. And hopefully, in an integrated way between what the province of Ontario can provide through the college system or other kinds of trainings, and what we can provide.
Right. And in terms of skill development, one of the programs that are offered in school is co-op, which many of students are taking advantage of, and that's definitely on a rise.
Yeah.
Has the City of Toronto explored any partnerships for co-ops within the Toronto Public Service and businesses in Toronto?
I did reference that in my presentation. We call that work-based learning. It's similar. So the 5-month program that I mentioned is an example of a co-op type program where we're compensating young people, and they are coming into jobs and gaining skills.
Right, but specifically to the grade 11 and 12 co-op programs, do we have any work going on?
No, that wouldn't be our role.
Okay.
For somebody that's in grade 11 or 12. Our program deals mainly with people that are on Ontario Works.
Okay, thank you.
Much, Councillor. Members of the committee? Pardon me? You're good. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right. To speak, Councillor Carroll, when you're to speak. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Cedar Bend. Yeah.
Yes, just to further flesh out the questions I was asking of Ms. Walcott and the presenters before as well. I see layers of problems here all being tried, all being attempted to be solved, but I still worry that that the reach down to the ground is really dependent on them coming looking for us. And even coming to look for the community agencies that we're accessing them through. Lots of young moms sitting at home thinking they can't go back to school because there's still an urban legend that you lose every other benefit if you go back to school. And it's not until they walk in the door that they start to learn, actually, if I just sit down with an OSAP person, I learn a whole bunch more than I knew from sitting down with an OW person. So even that level of coordination, we have nothing to do with OSAP, and yet we got to get that information to them. Because there's a lot of urban myth about it that stops them from even walking in the door. But I also think that we started out understanding that we're changing who we are, we're moving towards the knowledge economy. You don't get a job on an assembly line and stay there for life. You get educated not so that you can wear a white shirt and work for one company all your life, but so that you can have 6 or 7 different jobs. It's turning into 6 or 7 a year. So it's almost as if we created an easy path for major employers to say, we're only going to hire people on contract. And in fact, this building is one of the worst offenders. What do we do in every budget? We look at every division and say, how many jobs this year? Is your staff count down? We want it to be down. And if you ask for a new job, we say, is this permanent or temporary? It better be temporary. Is this an FTE that I'm stuck with forever? As an employer, we're just as bad as some of the private sector. And I don't want anything but temporary workers. I want to be able to offload them a year from now. So I think there's a collision course going on here. We're trying to create career pathways for people, and we'd like them to be somewhat flexible, but flexible is turning into expendable to meet our own, whatever is our most recent budget target, where we are in fact acting like the private sector now. And it seems to be okay not to invest in someone long-term, wherever you go in employment. So I think we have to be not only setting up these services, but I think maybe the political level's job is we have to start to be vocal. We're setting this up to create careers for people, but it's got to lead to more than 12 months of employment. And then lastly, and we talked about this a little bit in budget reform, and I've talked to Elaine Baxter-Trahere about this, what we do for young parents in terms of subsidized childcare, and that's needed for the test type of client, not the higher end hire. People going very entry level are likely going to need subsidized childcare. You can't have the childcare space till you're in the job, but at these entry levels, you can't get the job if you know you're not going to show up when they want you to at 8 o'clock in the morning, and if you can't get the childcare ahead of time. So there's a catch-22 built into that system. The same is true for school. You can apply to have subsidized childcare to go back to school and skill up, but you can't have the space till you're in the school. And once you're in the school, you don't have time to go and sit in the Children's Services office all day to get the space. There are some catch-22s that if we're going to coordinate these, we should fix those at the same time. That's why I was asking that question. And it's, to me, I think it's the approach that the agencies are taking. Sit down in a Tim Hortons with the mom who's gone through it and figure out why it was 4 years to get the space. You end up getting it just for the kids' last year of needing the space. When in fact, this is different than housing. It should be easy to solve because we're not talking about once we put them in this unit of housing, that space is locked up for 25 years. We're talking 3 or 4 years of using that space. We ought to be able to get them into it and then the next mom into it and on and on and on. So I hope that opportunity arises out of this bringing them together. Also examine the parts that are constraints within the existing systems. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Okay, any more speakers? Okay, seeing none, I will speak. I want to thank the staff for their presentation, and again, I thank the previous panel in their presentation. There is no doubt that this is a very complex issue, right? And I think we're trying to solve the problem on a number of different fronts. and because it needs to be attacked in a tactical way, in a coordinated way, and I think that efforts are being made in order to do just that. I wanted just to address the point that's been made by Councillor Carroll about the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. I don't know specifically what he said, but I did catch wind of it this morning, and it sort of stopped me in my tracks as well, in that the impression was that it's all about temporary work for the future, for the young people, millennials, and so on, however you want to define them. I beg to differ. And the reason is this. We know from industry there is a tremendous number of jobs that are trying to find skill set to meet those jobs that are there. And we've heard from you here, there are a number of people who have fallen off the job interface, if you will. And we need to help them to correct it, to help them back so they can connect on that on-ramp. And so that work is being done. One of the things that we did, and I know that Ralph Adams will be coming to speak shortly after you, on the 13th of this month, the group in Scarborough, which we formed, Manufacturing Technology Roundtable Advisory Group, bringing institution, educational components, business, large companies, small companies in, to provide an opportunity for young people to learn about careers in manufacturing, because there's a real need and there's a growth, there's a resurgence that's taking place. You may not be aware of it, but it's not like it used to be, but nonetheless, there is manufacturing taking place in a dramatic way. A Dreamliner airplane, for example, that's actually flying and it's a luxury airplane. Well, the circuit boards are made by a company in Scarborough. That company is in need of workers. That company, collaborating with the University of Toronto, Centennial College and Seneca and so on, and the provincial government and so on, is trying to identify ways to get young people into the stream. So we had over 300 young people that came from their high schools, as well as there's some college people there, students there as well, to learn a little bit about more, those opportunities. Their eyes were wide open because they didn't know. This is the first time that we've done that. Programs like these will actually be helpful, so we can perhaps ask the Minister of Finance to maybe see some of the work that we're doing in this collaboration and to see how he could actually help. Because I think if we amputate the dream, the dreamers die. And when that happens, our society and the impact overall is going to create a stall. We are recognized around the world as #1 in a lot of different categories. We want to make sure that the 1.4 million people that are working in the City of Toronto and those, thousands of others who want to join that workforce will be providing opportunity. I'm very proud of our municipal government and the collaboration with our NGOs and other partners, the work that's actually being done. Because we could actually turn our back and say, too bad, so sad, it's their fault. However they got into their conditions, the conditions that they're in, let's allow them to work their way out. Well, that's not really the thing to do. The thing to do are the things that we're doing, laying a foundation with a plan in order to effect change, because that will make their lives better. And so it's operating on all front. And I think that if we have a level of government who's off the view that things as they are is the way things are going to be, I'm not really supportive of that particular policy, principle, or sentiment, quite frankly. There are ways for us to effect change. It may not be as easy as maybe flipping a switch, but nonetheless, let's build a switch so we can flip it. And I think that's the opportunity here. So I see this as an opportunity for us to effect change, as you do as well. So I wholeheartedly welcome the thought, the presentation, and the work that's actually being done to effect change to ensure those who are vulnerable are addressed, and those who are looking for opportunity, who may not at this point be vulnerable, but in fact could be at a later date if we don't actually bring in place a structure and foundation to actually help them. So I can move receipt of the presentations as a whole, and then we will take it from. I now understand that Councillor Ford wishes to speak. Okay, fair enough, Councillor.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just have a motion being drafted up, so I don't know.
Being delivered to you now.
Okay. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but the intent of my motion
wanna
is to
put it on the
have
screen?
the city, pardon me?
The motion on the screen?
Okay, well, I don't know if this is exactly what I'm trying to get at. General manager test. Yeah, so that the general manager of TESS be requested to partner with Toronto School Boards to explore opportunities to partner on co-op programs to give youth more employment options and report back to the Economic Development Committee. I'm moving this motion because I think that the Toronto Public Service has a wide variety of jobs that we offer and diverse employment in the city of Toronto. And I think that we need to be partnering with our local school boards in terms of their co-op programs to see how we can work that into the Toronto Public Service and beyond when we have businesses in Toronto. I think this is a good way of skill development. I know not so long ago, I was in a co-op program, and it taught me a lot in terms of skill development for the workforce. So I think this is an opportunity we can embrace and look into how we can do this and explore some options. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, I just wondered whether or not, if I could be so bold as to suggest to you that maybe what we'll do is we ask the general manager to actually come back with a report to look into this, come back with a report to this committee. We could then discuss it further based on the information that comes forward, because this would be going to council and directing, and I don't think that's the way we'd like to do this.
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't like a report back on it. I'm not directing. I just want to see if there's any
Sure.
opportunities.
Okay, so then I'm just going to retweak this a little bit, amend it a little bit, so that we are in order as to what you'd like to do, which is to have something come back to this committee, have staff actually spend some time in looking at the opportunity. Okay?
That's correct. Thank you.
Madam Clerk? Okay, I was just discussing with the clerk, so we're just having some, Counselor, if you can just, no, can you take a look at this? Are you okay with this, Counselor? Counselor, Vice Chair? Right, exactly.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
To the general manager. Okay? Are we okay? Anyone wishes to speak to this or to ask any questions on this motion? That's correct, yeah. Okay. Councillor Ford, Councillor Carroll, you both okay? You both okay with this? Okay, so just to amend it to allow for a report to come back. The staff would have an opportunity to discuss with the Board of Ed, and I suspect that, and it's all the school boards, right? The Friends school boards, Catholic school board, district, the Toronto District school boards, and so on. All right, so that would be an appropriate way to deal with this. So, Councillor, you okay? All right. Okay, so we now have a motion. So we're going to receive the presentations, and we now have Councillor Ford's motion. So all those in favor of receiving the presentation, okay, and Councillor Ford's motion, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried, so we don't have to adopt anything. That's good. Okay, great. So that's it. Thank you. Number one is done. Okay, thank you. We are going to move right along, folks, because in the interest of time, we are now moving to ED 15.2, and that's a review of internet connectivity and advancing Toronto as a smart city. All right, we have a guest with us, Mr. Ralph Idams, who is the Managing Director of Civic Smartscape. Mr. Idams is I will say, Mr. Idams, if I could describe you as a entrepreneur, serial inventor, and focusing on technology from the Scarborough area? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you very much, sir. The floor is all yours. You're all set up, ready to go?
I think so.
Thank you. Okay, members, are we ready? Good morning, Mr. Idams.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Councillor Thompson, and thank you for indulging me this morning to the committee.
Your mic on? Is your microphone on? Is there a light on there in front of you?
Yeah, there's a little red button.
Okay, great, so I can hear. Maybe just come a little closer to the mic so we can hear you. Thank you.
Sure. As the councillor said, I am the managing director of a company called Civic Smartscapes. A little bit of background first is I founded a company called Vertigo Digital Displays in Scarborough back in 2001, which I sold to an American company called Civic Smartscapes in May of this year. And one of the reasons I'm here today, notwithstanding the invitation to speak, is I want to socialize the idea of the concept of a smart city, and also in listening to the previous speakers, kind of put a context on it for me for my presentation today. One is, with the smart city technology, it is a way to engage citizens and connect them directly with city services. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is smart city infrastructure can provide lasting benefits to a city. I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing in New York City, where eventually we'll have rolled out 8,000 of these smart city infrastructure structures, which will provide gigabit Wi-Fi to every citizen. The other aspect of socializing this idea is the prospect of maybe creating a technology cluster, because Vertigo, which is now Civic Smartscapes, is the #1 company in the world in outdoor digital technology. And many of the Toronto area companies that we work with could also play a major role in Toronto and around the world. And last but not least, of course, it's an opportunity to build an industry here in Toronto and create a lot of jobs. So again, essentially, my presentation here starts with kind of what I just mentioned, but people often ask me, what's a smart city? And I usually say, well, let's call it a smarter city, because most cities are smart to start with. I'm proposing a smarter city. How am I going to do that? You'll see a whole bunch of infrastructure equipment on my slide here. The first one to the left there is a Link product. That's what we're rolling out in the city of New York. So we have to put 8,500 of these systems in through Manhattan and the 5 boroughs. They're essentially replacing analog telephone booths. And as you can see from the image there, they're made up of a lot of electronics. One of the biggest things that the city of New York approached us on and wanted was broadband internet for all of its citizens. And we were able to deliver broadband internet for all its citizens at no cost to the city of New York. How do we do that? Well, we put together consortiums of companies that can deliver and manage the service and generate new modes of revenue. I can talk more about that a little later. We have projects on the go at the moment in New York, Chicago, Miami, Barcelona, Singapore, Australia, the UK, all really integrating a technology and putting it on the streets. The second aspect of my story is the engagement with citizens. People often can relate when I call it, imagine a very large smart phone or iPhone that can work outdoors. As you walk by these smartphones that are in the environment, you can turn your mobile cellular service off and you can connect to the broadband Wi-Fi. You can actually download and stream movies in seconds to your phone if you want. But even more powerful, we can connect to the city services. So just quickly want to talk about what we're doing in some of the other markets. Services like 911 and 311, imagine if you could just press a button on a touch screen and you'd be immediately connected to emergency services. Imagine if we can integrate that with security cameras that can geo-identify the location of where the unit is. We can do 311 services, so if there is, for instance, tourist information. In New York, many users are already pressing buttons and finding out what type of museums and art galleries and other tourist spots are available, and allows you to engage directly with that museum or art gallery. The other aspect of it is the mobile transactions. So from these smart city structures, you can download bus schedules, you can download subway schedules, train schedules, you can hail an Uber cab, whatever you like to do. So it's a pretty big topic, but I'm trying to do the the PhD within 5 minutes.
Just give us the overview,
Yeah.
the details of stuff. I think there are some things here in the presentation that we probably don't want to go into,
Yeah.
such as the financial information and so on.
So I'll probably just cover this slide here. So essentially, these are structures that sit outdoors. The concept really came from Europe many years ago, where they wanted to remove the clutter from the streets. So if you can imagine, when you're walking down Yonge Street or a major Toronto city street, there's bus shelters, there's displays, there's Wi-Fi repeaters, there's security cameras, there's cable TV cameras, there's Bell telephone boxes. Essentially, this smart city unit puts all that into one box. And as I said earlier, it allows us to do some pretty cool sensoring technology. In one of the cities, we're doing triangulation of acoustical noise. What's that mean? Imagine if there was an explosion or a gunshot somewhere in the city, and we were able to provide the analytics to the security agencies of where the origin of that particular noise came from instantaneously. Other things like air pollution, noise pollution, traffic management systems. In New York, we're monitoring the flow and speed of car traffic as it goes by our units, and we're providing that information to the transportation departments for things like light timing to improve traffic flow and reduce air pollution in the city. Just another example here up on the presentation is, we find that wherever we have them installed, people are engaging with them and getting useful information from them. This is the one on the streets of New York. So they have an architectural element to it, so that they match the vision that the city of New York has in all of its street furniture. I'm not going to go through the process of how we would really do this, but one of the concepts that has worked well in New York and Miami and other municipalities around the world, typically they would start with a smart city committee. And that smart city committee would then educate itself on what's the available technologies. I've got to restart your computer message here, but try to postpone that. Yeah, so I think, essentially that's the short version of the story. We are located in Scarborough. That's where our new product introduction center is. We have all of our engineering folks there, and in the technology showcase that we did a few weeks ago, we had the University of Toronto candidates and Centennial College candidates and even high school candidates approached us about possible careers at Civic Smartscape. We are planning on expanding our facility in Scarborough. So that's my story.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I know we have some questions. Moving Moving right along. Questions? Okay. So, all right, so I'll ask some questions. Oh, Councillor Kelly. No, that's right. Councillor Kelly?
Assuming a full build-out, what are the capital costs and the operating costs after that?
Right. Well, we have three business models. One of them is a fully funded system for you, so the city would pay nothing. Essentially, we have an advertising-based model.
All right, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I noticed that in the text.
Yeah.
But still, the question is, what are the capital, assuming a full build-out, what would be the capital costs?
Again, it's
How
hard to...
grateful should we be?
Very grateful, because, in the New York rollout, the consortium members invested about $200 million as the initial capital cost of the deployment, and many millions more for ongoing service and maintenance. And the biggest cost driver of it is really the optical fiber backbone. So what I don't know about Toronto is there an optical fiber backbone already in place? If there is, it's a lot cheaper.
And typically, how long to negotiate? This is assuming that something of this sort emerges, your company or maybe others. How long does how long does it take to birth this?
Sure. That's a great question. And again, it depends on, the city, it depends on the administration in the city, the desire for this type of equipment, whether the fiber is there. But I would say, on average, if the fiber is there and there's a willingness to deploy, we can start deploying within 12 months. At the moment, we're installing 30 of these beacons a week in the city of New York. If that gives you a bit of a guideline. So it'll be completely built out in about 2.5 years.
It would appear that there would be jobs in manufacturing these units, installing them, and operating them. Do you have any numbers that
Yes.
in those fields?
Yes, of course. Those are the obvious jobs in manufacturing the product. And, I would say that for your typical city project, it probably involves 100 people continuously to manufacture them and build them. But I'd say the bigger opportunity for Toronto, that's a huge opportunity to build manufacturing jobs, but the bigger one in Toronto is we've already been approached by many companies because what makes Civic unique, and probably the single most reason I'm being invited to address cities all over the world, is we have the world's largest contract, which is the City of New York. We're already rolling it out. So we're number one in the industry. The other jobs that come with it are there's also the application development side of it. So you may or may not be aware, there are some world-leading companies in Toronto that do smart parking applications, that do smart surveillance applications. They're world-leading, but they're struggling to find a marketplace because we sell an integrated solution. So imagine if we could get a demonstration going here in the City of Toronto using software developed in the City of Toronto, but also the operating system that goes along with connecting to the municipality. That's the thing that most people often overlook, is there has to be a security layer before you would allow me to connect to your traffic control computers. So there are some pretty formidable companies in Toronto that would also be in a situation to expand their workforce. This is a brand new industry sector. Our growth at the moment is measured in 20% a month. That's how fast we're growing. Cities around the world are embracing it, and we have a really unique opportunity in Toronto because we have the software cluster, we have the application developer cluster, we have the content creation cluster, so the movie production industries, that's here as well, and you have Civic, which is now the #1 in that space. So you know, I have strong views, which I'm happy to come back at another time when we all have more time to discuss how we could launch that initiative. Not sure if I answered your question there.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's fine. Okay, Councilor Crisanti?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. So you indicated you're in the largest market already in New York. How many other cities worldwide might you be in?
When we combine the Vertigo, which was the Toronto company that I founded that just sold to Civic, probably 20 different cities around the world.
20.
Yeah.
And so you're obviously monitoring the success of the system. I'm particularly interested in the emergency messaging, being able to identify problematic areas in the city, noise areas, gunshot. So do you monitor those stats? And do you also monitor, you know, the success of it in terms of, well, it's been very helpful in terms of solving particular crimes or identifying or getting the police to a scene much quicker?
Very good question, because we enable that data to be collected, and we work with scientists around the world that are creating the algorithms for what you're asking. Some of them are already pretty well defined, things like traffic flow and light management. Oh, I forgot to mention overhead lights, so street light management is another one that is really advanced, and these algorithms and software exist. On the triangulation, gunshot triangulation, it's still in the experimental stage. So we can identify it, but you know, the algorithm to pinpoint it is still, I would call it, it's not a science project, but it's in research testing at the moment.
So how long has it been in research testing?
We've been working on it for about 18 months.
18 months. And how much longer do you think it'll be at that phase before it goes into?
Well, we're ready to deploy it now if in cooperation with municipalities. So I always caution people, it's not perfect, but it's much better than the other available technologies.
Okay. And I think you may have been asked this question already, but it says in your presentation there are 3 phases. So from phase 1, when you're scoping, I guess, through
Yes.
to the execution, what roughly is that time frame?
I would say I find on average if a city is motivated and it already has an understanding of what its objectives and goals are, you know, it's probably 6 months to get a test going. I mean, we could conceivably have equipment somewhere in Toronto under test in 6 months.
In 6 months?
Yes.
And fully up and running sometime shortly after that?
Yes. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Anyone else? Okay, just a couple of quick questions from me, Mr. Items. New York City has a big street furniture contract. Is that part of the, is your, no, as we, but I was going to get to that, But is that, are you part of that contract, or is this something
This is something different. So that is another excellent question, and it's probably going to be the #1 challenge that Toronto has.
Right.
In that New York started looking at smart city technology about 6 years ago. So they're kind of ahead of the curve, and they recognize the fact that if they gave a franchise out to a bus shelter advertising company, for instance, which I think is the case in Toronto, they may have exclusive rights for any digital advertising that shows up. So that would be the first question I would ask. Even if that's the case, we have some cities where that is the case. So what the municipality does is you know, foster talks between us and that advertising company, because it can still work.
Right, and that's where I was alluding to, that's where I was going with this, because we do have an exclusive with Astral Media.
Yeah.
And so that could be problematic. But I know you're not here to ask us for business, because I asked you to come to explain to us how your technology actually work in the context of a smart city. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right, so your presentation has been tailored.
Yeah.
I think it may some may see it and thinking that it's an opportunity where you're coming to do it. You're not doing that. You are saying, however,
Contrary, yeah.
that given the fact that we're looking to become a smarter city,
Yes.
that you wanted to provide information to the City of Toronto to understand that there are companies in Toronto that are producing products that are being utilized globally. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the objective.
Yeah.
And then you also wanted to add your voice to the manufacturing and technology forum that we had on the 13th at Discover Civic Center, young people coming out, because you heard this morning about sort of the thought around, you know, you're looking at sort of part-time jobs for the rest of your life as opposed to career opportunities in manufacturing and technology. You would say that your company is always looking for workers who have the skill set, the ability, and so on. Would you agree that's the objective?
Absolutely. I would even add to that. I come from sort of the 70s and 80s, so I would say good manufacturing jobs create wealth in a city and a country, and they also create long-term jobs. We don't lay people off. We don't shuffle them around. We train them. You know, our whole ecosystem, not just Civic, but the ecosystem we deal with, these are good-paying jobs with good benefits, and we're kind of lost in the shuffle. That's why we're participating with your events, Councillor Thompson. Is great to see the universities come in and say, "Wow, manufacturing is exciting." You know, so the software development, a lot of people don't equate that with modern manufacturing. So yes, I'm here to socialize these concepts for the good of our city.
Okay. And again, you are selling around the world globally, but not in your own city where you manufacture the product.
And I equate that to Toronto is unfortunately a little behind the curve based, you know, when you compare it with other cities around the world. That's why, again, another reason I'm here is we've really got to look at the fact that you have some world-leading companies here in Toronto. We're one of them, but there's dozens of them. And, you know, Councillor, I'm going on a road trip now for 3 weeks, and it's all in Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Okay, so members, the item in front of us, I wonder if we had questions of staff and general manager and so on. Okay, so we'll get to that. Okay, no problem. Okay, so again, we'll thank Mr. Items for his presentation, and now we will afford you the opportunity to be able to ask staff questions. I'm going to start to my right, Councillor Frakidakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 6 of the report, it mentions the BIAs. So I'm just wondering if we're planning to reach out through the BIAs to the small businesses like coffee shops and cafes that provide free Wi-Fi as part of their services to get their input on this matter.
Yes, we've been working with Tabia and others on the Digital Main Street program and other aspects of helping facilitate residents and consumers access to high-speed internet while they're shopping or whatever. So, yes.
Okay, great. So my next question is if there's any representative from the BIAs or from any of the small businesses on your working group?
I assume so, but I'll ask Tabby whether John is.
No, sorry. John, please.
Just say yes or no.
No. Okay. So, well, this is an opportunity for asking staff questions. Our staff should know that information. So I wonder who from our staff can address that. But Susan Vega's leading the Smart City Group. Okay, thank you. That's an answer.
So could we actually get somebody
Yes.
from on it?
Ms. Vegas, I wonder if you could go to a microphone, please, because you might be needed here because you're heading up the Smart City Working Group.
Hold my time.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll just add a few more minutes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, we had a Smarter City Summit in May of this year, And the purpose of that was to engage the City of Toronto in creating a nucleus to take advantage of this. And BIAs were consistently mentioned throughout that summit as a fantastic resource, and we certainly have that as a part of our recommendations that should be coming forth to the city at the end of this year.
Great. So through the chair to the general manager, you mentioned Rogers has a program for TCHC residents, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Susan, do you want to talk about the Rogers program, or Joe?
Sorry, I haven't been involved with the Rogers program.
We'll get you that information, Councillor.
Okay. In the United States, Sprint has announced that they would donate 1 million connected devices and free mobile accounts to underprivileged kids as part of an effort to address the digital divide. And I was wondering if we've seen any sign that any company up here is looking at something similar.
Not that I'm personally aware of, but we'll certainly look into that. Zaid
Sorry,
has a
through the
comment.
chair, just want to clarify that we're working on the report with our colleagues in IT, and one of the main things that the report outlines is the fact that there will be a whole kind of inventory study or search or scope or whatever the exact words are in the report. I can't quote to you offhand, but the key point is that, in fact, the goal of both divisions working together is to get an inventory of what is happening, because there is so much that's going on and so many viewpoints that the city really doesn't have a clear understanding, because there's so much information, and then in some cases not enough information. And so we're working, I think, as the report outlines, on finding out all that information to be able to report back.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, but my
Counselor,
question
can I
was...
just interject for 1 second? I'll give you
Yeah.
more time. But I know we have the CIO here, the Chief Information Officer, Mr. Meikles, is actually here. I wanted to give him an opportunity maybe just to add his voice to your question to help you. And I'll add another 25 seconds or so to your time.
That's fine.
Thank you, Councillor, and through the chair. Yes, as mentioned earlier, there is a comprehensive study that will be done. In our case, a critical point to bring to your attention is the city could try and build out its own, let's call it, fiber optic network. But instead of going that route, we have several service providers that are well represented in the city, other private companies, plus our own network as a city. So what we want to do is do an inventory of all of that, so we see what type of coverage that we have and what type of foundational coverage is required so that we can implement these various smart cities technologies. So that's why we're undertaking this process of doing an independent consultant analysis that way.
No, fair enough, and I appreciate we're going to do an inventory. I was just bringing to everyone's attention that Sprint is doing something in the United States that's actually pretty spectacular to serve the underserved and the underprivileged, and we here have endorsed and are trying to fund our poverty reduction strategy. So something like this plays right into the hands. So I was just wondering if there is a company, a service provider in this city that wants to step up to the plate and be our Sprint, if you will.
Okay.
So
Thank
my
you,
next,
Counselor.
sorry, I had another question, and I was, it's...
Last question.
Yeah, so I'm concerned about the digital divide, because on page 5, it says in the report, in approaching the many aspects and dimensions of the councillor motions listed above, staff are approaching the topics from 3 perspectives. And I note that none of the 3 perspectives that follow talk about addressing the digital divide. So I do support the overall initiative and agree it's important to foster a smart city. I just worry that what it could mean, that one of the unintended consequences could be leaving many people further behind. So I just want staff's assurances that problems of the digital divide is a key component of the review of this matter.
I'll say yes, and Rob will say yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, further questions? Okay. I just have a couple. Through to the general manager. I'll get back to you then, Councillor. There has been a number of requests as it relates to connectivity and the internet and so on of you. How are you advancing and responding to all of these requests?
So part of the purpose of this report is to indicate that we're pulling all of those separate requests as they're listed in the background into one report, and we're bundling our research on that in partnership with the CIO and his staff so that we can address these in a comprehensive way rather than piecemealing each one independently.
So the province has been working with municipalities with respect to broadband application and looking at creating more broadband development and so on. Where do we stand with respect to that? What's the level of broadband distribution and development in the City of Toronto?
Part of the study is to be able to answer that question, but Rod may have more immediate information.
Yeah, I just echo what Mike said. The study will cover that. We know of various initiatives, so part of it is combing the landscape, various levels of government, what we have, private, public, et cetera, so we have that full inventory.
Okay. Then when you come back with your report, will we be looking at a digital and I guess a smart city master plan as part of the, I gather you'll be doing some sort of asset mapping, you'll be doing some additional work in terms of research, who's doing what and what are the technological opportunities and so on. Will you come back with a master plan? Is that part of this objective?
Sure. I think we, Councillor, or through you, Chair, we will come back. These specific items will come back with the foundation that will help us build that master plan.
Okay.
The response here doesn't necessarily is the whole holistic master plan, but that's what we're moving towards. So we have a framework today, but we need to complete the master plan.
Fair enough. Now, when people talk about smart city, there are a number of component parts associated with that. For me particularly, I look at obviously the need to ensure that the city is utilizing technology in its most efficient way, and it's traditionally the smart concept. But one of the things that I'm trying to get my mind around, the idea of those companies who are providing material, technology, and so on to affect the smart city development, how do we advance the opportunity to incorporate those companies into, let's say, the supply chain mechanism, where their products, goods, and services, or their ability to provide technology is also leveraged there so we can create market opportunities for those companies? How do we address that in this report as such? What's the plan?
Maybe I could take that, Councillor, if it's
Whoever.
okay. This plan will lay it out. We will do some benchmarking, which working with Pat McCarney and her WCCD, World City
Data.
Council
City Data.
and others to be able to point out the fact that we actually have a very strong and robust sector that can contribute to this and what we can do to work with it. There's many leading members of that community on our Smart City Working Group that Susan is co-chair with on. So Susan, do you want to add anything to what I've just said?
Sure. We are doing the benchmarking, as you mentioned, but we are also doing an asset mapping exercise in partnership with the IT division, but that is in 5 municipal divisions: water, waste, public health, energy and environment, and one of the transportation, of course. And it is the intent to create an inventory of the smarter assets that are currently being offered within those divisions, and then next year the intention is to create a narrative around what makes Toronto smart and use that as the basis to inform, if you wish, export strategy, and certainly to populate it as part of an online presence.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions at the moment. To speak, anyone?
I just had the one more question.
Oh, please, go ahead, Councillor
I
Carroll.
said no questions, and then I remembered, sorry, Mr. Chair, right after you started. I was reminded reading the report about Councillor Layton's motion about our backing up the CRTC ruling, which got a pretty handy support from council. But we never did hear back how we supported. Basically the motion was built on really supporting the position the City of Calgary was taking. Did we make a presentation to CRTC in that regard, or did we just submit something in writing? What was the follow-up on that motion?
The best of my ability, and I would probably like the opportunity to just check on that. The motion happened after the proceedings had been closed off, so we couldn't make a formal presentation
okay.
to the board. And given the CRTC's decision, it seemed that it became mute from that point on.
Okay, but we're somehow recorded on record as having been
Well,
supported.
we do because of the council.
Right, okay. And the comment that we're somewhat behind the curve is probably a little overstated, given your remarks. Just having this group working on this right now really puts us more or less in line with some major cities, is it not?
I think it depends on which, smart city is such a wide scope. The
True,
gentleman's
true.
talking about
In some
the public
respects.
realm access
Yeah.
to it. There are many, many other aspects to it. I mean, as you know, the Intelligent Communities Foundation awarded Toronto this Intelligent Community Award a couple of years ago. So clearly they felt, in comparison to many other cities, that we were up there. There is much, much further to go. We are nowhere
Right.
close to being able to do it. But I think we're in the ballgame.
Okay, quickly.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Speakers, I have two on the list, Councillors Kelly and Carroll. Okay, Councillor Kelly, may we begin with you, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd move the recommendations of this report. And I want to thank the chair for inviting Mr. Idams to committee. The world is changing so rapidly, and it's becoming so complex, and yet at the same time, in a way, so simple. Around the dinner table on Thanksgiving, someone asked a question to which most of us there couldn't answer. So my stepson took out his phone and he just said, Google, verbally, Google asked the question, and there was the response. I think it's going to be really important that we get on top of this as a city, the fourth largest city in North America, as rapidly, as quickly as possible. I think not only do members of council know that, so too does our staff, and this report indicates that they're moving in that direction. The only advice I would give is that I hope they move rapidly, because it's going to be very important for us to roll this out as quickly as we can. I'm just a layperson. My life is being shaped by forces that I'm attempting to understand, and I'm hoping that in the end, there's a benefit as well as a challenge to the rollout of the electronic age. Have you read Average is Over by Tyler Cowen, by the way? I'm eager to find someone in the field who's read that book so I can learn from their reaction to it. It's a book it has scary aspects to it, but your message today, I think, is a very positive one, and I appreciate hearing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Carroll to speak?
Yes, I just wanted to remind the members that, in fact, we can move, even though we have a very exclusive contract for street furniture, the deal for it was actually structured so that we could be flexible. There was a bit of a kerfuffle over an updating of some of their fixtures recently, and people had to be reminded that within that 20-year deal, that the supplier was given the ability to be able to come forward should new technologies emerge within their 20-year time frame. They could, for instance, enter into a deal with the deputant and be using his equipment to meet their contract terms on the City of Toronto. That would be up to them. We left it that way so that we can be nimble, so that we can act on these things, but through a supplier. That supplier, it goes beyond being free, it actually returns revenue to us, and so it worked out well for us. So having that flexibility there is important. Meeting the divide is important, as Councillor Fragedakis pointed out, but Councillor Kelly just demonstrated a perfect way in which we can start to work on the divide. Part of the reason voice-activated technology was invented in the first place was to meet accessibility requirements, not just for kids to make us feel old and inadequate when they so easily use it. So something as simple as in a city-run long-term care, maybe the bar we should be setting, maybe what we should be demonstrating is one of the things you want in that building is IT support that makes sure that a senior who can really no longer even navigate the buttons or keyboard pad, that their device that their kids probably gave them for Christmas is programmed for voice-activated technology, because that's who it was designed for. So those sort of graceful solutions to the digital divide in terms of the aging population, or eventually there may be other solutions where income is the barrier that go beyond kids go to the library, because that's just not realistic anymore. But if a family of low income has decided, I need to be able to reach these kids, that's how I'm going to keep my at-risk kids on the straight and narrow. I'm not going to be able to afford my landline. I have to use cell technology, and that's all I can afford. Now we have someone living in a TCHC apartment, and she has a way of keeping track of her at-risk kids, but she no longer has access to the front door of the building. It's those types, because she doesn't have a landline to open the door of her unit. It's those types of technology fixes that we have to address as we move along. Broadband does exist here. There are ways for us to, you can adapt the security system of the building and so that it works in a digital program that can be operated by the cell phone and get rid of the outdated landline attached front door mechanism. Those are the types of things that our internal services and indeed some vendors can help use us to solve these problems so that we deal with the divide that is both income-based, age-based, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very excited about this work going forward, but I just hasten to point out that it should go beyond just talking to the people working in the sector. The divide is a big and important part of it, so it means accessing those same people that we heard Ms. Walcott talking about. There are agencies sitting in Tim Hortons talking to people about barriers to employment, barriers to quality of life. There's a technology story in talking to those people in the Tim Hortons as well that will help us square the circle here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very well put, Councillor, and thank you. I'm just working on a quick motion to kind of get folks to talk to each other. That would be the General Manager of Economic Development and the CIO and his team to companies like Civic. Here we go. So there's a motion that I'm putting forward, and just actually basically coordinated on the fly, so to speak. But what I'm trying to do here with this is that I want there to be greater discussion with respect to the industry and some of the technologies that's being developed out there that we may not be aware of, and that would make a lot of sense for us to incorporate these things as part of the report coming back, first of all, for our understanding, edification, secondly, as far as an opportunity to be considered as we move forward. So, for example, the City of Toronto is talking about, free Wi-Fi. Here's an opportunity where we could actually have free Wi-Fi with some of the technology that is produced by Civics and others. So what I'm simply saying is, let's have those particular discussions. Let's have our CIO and his team, General Manager of Economic Development, let's engage. Let's ensure that we understand what's available, and let's bring that back as part of the discussion that Ms. Vega's team and others will be having through the process, so that we will be much more informed as to the opportunity. Because prior to meeting you, Mr. Emden, I didn't know what you did and what you do right here in the city. It seems people around the world, great distance away from 20 minutes it takes from Scarborough to come downtown, are fully aware as to what you're doing and are implementing your technology to help them to make their cities smarter and so on. We are a global city. We're not trying to be a global city. We are. We are not a city that is about on the, to be on the verge of. We are. You know, we're not a city where people talk about, well, Toronto needs to get on the map. Not sure what map they're talking about, but we're on the big map of the world. People know about Toronto. The word Toronto is much more known around the world than the province of Ontario or Ontario, period, right? And so we are a brand, a good brand. We want to make it better, utilizing technology and so on. Technology, in my view, is a great equalizer. You know, the sixth dad here is a technology whiz. I mean, everybody comes to him for wisdom as part of the great...
You just pointed out he doesn't know how to work stereo.
Well, not yet. But his tweeting and so on that occurs is just phenomenal. And he has been able to transport himself in a very modern way in terms of reflecting how to talk and how to reach utilizing social media. The point that Councillor Carroll made about seniors, the voice activation and so on and so forth. It's all there. The question is, do we have the will? Are we really interested in actually scaling to that next level that continues to propel our city forward in its greatness? I think we do. We're going to have to make some investment. We're going to have to collaborate and figure out what's out there and what do we want to utilize as part of our feature for creativity and this concept of smart city. But I also want to remind us that there are many companies, as I said, are doing things here. We've got to find ways as well to elevate opportunities for those companies to be able to advance themselves globally. And so our going global strategy that we talk about, that we're looking at implementing, so that we as municipalities, when we identify opportunities in terms of markets and so on for our companies, we can help to advance and tell those stories and helping those companies to create those entrees into those markets, to penetrate those markets. Why is that important? Well, it takes us back to item 1 that we were dealing with here today, creating opportunities and so on. So we're not simply looking at the part-time jobs of millennials and so on. We are looking at full-time career opportunities that are going to pay good wages, create opportunities, benefits, and so on. So if the federal government don't see the big picture, then we at the grassroots have to help them to understand the big picture. And I think it is our responsibility because they're so far removed from where we are. So it's not a criticism of them, although I do think that there are many people who do see it within the context of the Fed. We just have to help to reinforce that because we're not competing against them. We're collaborating with them in order to advance the interests of our citizens and so on. And that's the objective, and we need to work with all our partners. So I put this motion forward so that we can all work together, bring ideas forward as part of the report, the review that has to come forward. Because if we don't do that, then I think we're failing us ourselves, and we don't, certainly failure is not one of the options that's available to us. Okay? Okay, so I just want to make sure. Councillor Carroll, did you have a question on the motion?
Yeah, just a question of the mover. With all due respect, because it was a fascinating presentation.
Yes.
But I don't know if we want to, there are a number of companies. I don't know if you want to specifically mention a potential vendor in a motion.
Sure, yeah, and as I said, I was doing it quickly on the fly.
Yeah.
So I can simply say either stakeholders or companies
Relevant sector stakeholders.
Right,
would
that'd be fine.
work for me, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. And I was looking at that as well, Councillor, but yeah, absolutely. So can we make those changes? And I think we cover ourselves, quite frankly. We're not necessarily creating any preferential opportunities for any one specific company. And that was not the intent of the motion as such. All right, so we'll just rework it and. Yeah. Okay. All right, take a look at it now, members. See whether or not you're okay with that. Okay? Okay, fair enough. Good. Glad to collaborate. Okay, so we're going to move receipt of the presentation, and also then we have them. Pardon? Oh, okay. Came in as a, sorry? Yeah. Okay, so my amendment's on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. And item as amended. All those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Emden. All right, so moving right along, members, and we are now approaching 10 minutes after 12. Councillor Frакadakis, we had held promoting cycling tourism.
So I've had my questions answered, but I just wanted to have an opportunity to speak to the item.
Okay, is there anyone else with questions on this item? Okay, seeing none, we are at speakers. Councillor, the floor is yours.
Right, okay, so I mean, I'll move that the committee receive this report, but wanted to just state my concerns, because in the report on page 5, it actually says that Tourism Toronto doesn't actually consider cycling tourists as a target market, and that actually is a little shocking to me, because we're building so much in the way of infrastructure for cyclists in this city that I think that if they don't have a product at this moment, that they should be working on creating something to promote to cycling tourists. I know I've gone on lots of trips over the last decade or so, and they've all involved some aspect of cycling, and other cities around the world are doing lots in the way of promoting their cities as a destination for people who are interested in getting around by bikes. And I know that there's lots of discussion here around cycling in this city, and I think that we need to be gathering some data to try to figure out how much money cycling tourists and just cycling generates, so that we can have more informed discussions, not just here at this committee, but at all committees.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. So you're moving the item then? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving right along, we're now moving to ED 15.5. It's the Toronto Economic Bulletin. Councillor Carroll, you had some questions.
Yeah, just a quick question. A quick question, which leads to, I have a brief motion about it to maybe get some more information. We have long lists in the bulletin about number of tall buildings being done, number of building applications coming in. I thought there was only one of these going on. It turns out there are 4 or 5 applications downtown where we have hotels. We have very strict policy around converting an apartment into a condominium, but we don't have a policy, as far as I'm aware, of converting a hotel into a condominium. And I understand now that there are 4 or 5 applications along this lines where it's a very tall building, like our list of 50 here, and it's a hotel being made taller, but as they convert part of it into a condominium, they're not actually making sure the exact same number of rooms end up there. Do we have any economic development data on that?
So we are aware of, I'm aware of 3 I can think of right off the bat, projects. 1 is a conversion, and 2 are tear downs and rebuild something else.
So
Or
lose
less
them all.
of. So the point I think you're making, Councillor, is that there's more evidence that we are losing hotel rooms than we are gaining them. Right now, the hotel industry is probably in its best shape ever in terms of revenue and the price of a hotel room and the number of hotel rooms in terms of occupancy. So it's in a very robust stage. Normally, you'd expect the industry to start building hotel rooms. Obviously, with the impacts of Airbnb and others, there's some reluctance, not sure where to go, but we are well aware of the issue, and I have started talking to the GTA, to the Greater Toronto Hotels Association about the issue. So I'm happy to entertain any
So the Airbnb piece is, I think has gone somewhere else. That's sort of an MLS motion that's traveling.
Right.
But just the fact that there's no policy about conversion is concerning to me. Would you welcome a motion if we just ask for a report back that gives us the
No, I
standards?
think it's an important issue because
Yeah,
we don't
I'm
want
not trying to go down the Airbnb road because that's happening somewhere else, but I think we ought to have this information should it find its way to our committee. Yeah, okay. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Any further questions? Okay. I just had a couple through you, to you, Mr. General Manager. On page 4, it talks about the mean hourly wages. We've been talking a lot recently about the need to get to a $15 minimum wage. When I look at these numbers, it would suggest to me that we're well beyond the $15 minimum wage. The $15 minimum wage then is being applied to what industry and specifically to individuals? How would you characterize that? Who are the ones who are making $15 or would intentionally benefit from a $15 hourly wage rate? When we look at your numbers here, and those numbers are, the mean average hourly wage rates are much higher. In September, it was $26.72. August 2016, that was 2015. It sort of went down in August of 2016. Then it went back up in September 2016 to $26.72.
So the issue here, of course, is that this is an average across everybody who gets paid on an hourly basis. So the people that get the lower wage levels that are at the minimum would be those, typically are those people that work part-time, that work in service industries, and whether that's in a retail store or in a fast food outlet, et cetera. So we could do a bit of work on that. I'm looking at Peter, who's the one that'll have to do the work.
He's smiling.
So,
So, and just, okay, so just add, so where does the history of providing a wage rate or hourly rate that is lower than the sort of average hourly rates to, let's say, restaurant workers, for example? So where does that come from, where there is a requirement to add the tip component part of it to reflect a build-up to their salary? What's the history of that? Do we know?
well, I do know that there's big change in the restaurant industry where the tips don't end up necessarily in the waiters' pockets, first of all. They tend to get shared or they tend to get grabbed by the restaurateur.
Right.
So the whole concept, as you well know, on minimum wage is to prevent extreme exploitation of workers. And we're constantly looking at it. I know SDFA has done some work on that, and there's other avenues where we're addressing this.
So the work that's being done on that, help me unpack that for me, because can we introduce a motion that says, in the City of Toronto, if you are a restaurant employee and you're obviously hope to generate and benefit from the tips, that employers are not able to claw that back or utilize that as part of their profits, but in fact that funds that would be earned by the waiter or the waitress that would be kept by them, would we legally, moving down that road, what would be our legal ability to introduce such a change?
I have absolutely no idea.
Maybe legal can perhaps give us a...
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm asking the question. Right now, I understand in many restaurants and hotels and other service industry where employees are generating tips, some of these facilities are clawing back or, in fact, keeping those tips. And so the beneficiary who you'd like to tip is not benefiting. And at the same time, they're not necessarily making minimum wages. They're making a lower wage rate with the expectation that they would obviously benefit from the additional top-up with the tips, if you will. I'm asking whether or not what are our, the opportunity if we were to introduce a motion or a bylaw that would affect that in Toronto, that the tips that are earned would be generated and kept by the individuals as opposed to the establishment and so on.
I don't have any specific expertise in that area. My sense is that the city likely wouldn't have jurisdiction to do that, but I'd have to get back to you further.
Okay, well, I'd like you to get back to me on that. I'm just inquiring as to whether or not that's a possibility. I know. So, thank you. Those are my questions. Councillor Kelly, did you have a question or just to speak?
Well, you had asked a question with respect to the people who earn
Right.
at an hourly rate to the lower part of that hierarchy of wages. From the reading I've done, it's youth, seniors, and people who live in a family with other earners in it.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay, just speak. I have Councillor Kelly first. Councillor?
No, that's fine.
Okay, fine. Okay. Councillor Carroll?
Yes, the motion I was talking about earlier with the GM is that the GM be requested to report to ACDEV on the volume of hotel room conversions, impacts of this trend on the tourism and convention sector, and propose next steps from a policy perspective. And so I flagged for you really through my question. I wasn't aware that, I gathered that it is up to 5 now. There are a couple who have just done informal walk-ins to planning. And I thought it was, we all know about the Chelsea, that one's approved and is on its way, but I didn't realize it had carried on. And so what's happening is folks are applying to do the interesting type of hotel we saw at the Ritz and we saw at the Shangri-La, where you're knocking down the Chelsea Hotel is being converted into a condominium. So what happens is they're knocking down the building and they say it's going to be a hotel and a condo, but each time there are fewer hotel rooms and more condo. And so as the GM pointed out, in one place, just knock it down and convert the whole thing. And while we have policy to protect you from doing purpose-built rental conversions to condominium without replacing the units, we don't have any policy and don't even really know our jurisdiction, I don't think, in terms of watching a business model change where we've zoned mixed use. You can have either a hotel or a residential, and we don't have any policy in place to say we need to see you replace those hotel rooms. It's a very tricky area. I don't even know what's possible, which is why I'm asking for an initial report here. I think it's important to point out because we will have that conversation going on in another standing committee about Airbnb, but more importantly, there's also the issue of we know that our convention center and indeed Allstream over on the other side are, they fit certain parts of the convention sector demand, but not others. And we know one day we'll have to develop one. But if our whole hotel sector becomes fluid and hasn't really decided where it lands, what's the heart of our hotel community, then we're going to have a darn hard time figuring out where next to fill our gap in the convention sector. So I think just getting this initial report might lead us down a road that takes a while, but we need to just get it started. And if I can just add one other comment, Mr. Chair, I was really happy to hear your line of questioning, because it's something I've felt, I don't know that it's our jurisdiction, but it's gone on ever since the change to pay by the automatic terminal. Some hospitality establishments have their system set up so that you're typing right in waiter number 234, and so we type in 15% please or 20% because we got great service, thinking it's going automatically to that waiter. Waiters in the city in places where they haven't got the most up-to-date system, but they are using those terminals, have to keep their own app in a pocket, in their apron, and keep track of what's going in, because it's not all making it to their disbursements. So to look into what is our jurisdiction, or if we find out that it's not our jurisdiction, but we know the data, we can certainly be the communicator that sends that on to the appropriate jurisdiction. So I really welcome your questioning. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
And you move the report, move receipt? Okay. All right. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And I'll work with staff on getting more details on that. So items, we will adopt the item with the amendment to that item. So all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving right along, members. We have about 4 minutes, and we have Councillor Carroll, this is your new business, business out of the box. This is the last item, yeah.
I believe the GM wants to, you had a slight change to the motion that I wrote in my original letter. There it is, yeah.
Yeah,
So this is really just an update. Bailiwickism, someone wants to do one of these in my area, and I realized we don't even have the report back from the motion we moved. It was either right at the beginning of the term or even right before we all headed out into the hustings. But we asked for a report back on the business out of the box model. And if it's going to become a thing, as the young cats say, if it's going to happen across the city, what is our role as a facilitator, and how are we going forward with this, so that it doesn't become a sort of a random favorites thing, but there are guidelines around it. So we haven't had that report back. But in the meantime, this one actually is ready to go, and Parks and Rec has already signed off on it, even to do one of these in Thorncliffe Park, kind of like the one that's already going on in McCormick Park in Councillor Bailau's area under that initial pilot. So the general manager has suggested, rather than what I've moved here, that this more specifically relates to the already applied for Thorncliffe Park use.
Okay, thank you. There's a question. Councillor Fracadakis, you have a question? Sure.
Sorry, so it's not to fund the Thorncliffe Park one, but to see about funding it and see where the money would come from. Is that correct?
Right. Rather than my wording, it says possible source of funds that would be required to facilitate the implementation. It gets SFDA involved, I think, quite appropriately, because they oversee CPIP and our old form of economic development grants, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'd support this change to my motion, because it takes it to the right area.
Thanks. I just question about how is it that you've decided Thorncliffe Park?
Well, I didn't decide Thorncliffe Park. When I was looking...
I'm not objecting to Thorncliffe Park.
Right.
It's certainly a
When
worthwhile
but just so you know, when I was looking into what happened to the report that we moved here in committee on behalf of the folks who want to start one in my ward at Oriole, I said, well, wait a minute, we haven't had the report back. And in making inquiries, I learned that no, we haven't had the report back, but the pilot finished, and the McCormick Park one was a success. And so on that park model, which is quite different from what's gone on at Scatting Court, Thorncliffe Park is already organizing to do another one. Through that same group of moms who regenerated the park there. And so there's already this one moving through the system in Councillor Burnside's area. So this just says, let's get the report back, and someone's got all the organization and even Parks and Rec sign off to do one. Let's send it to the appropriate office to solve their problem in time for next summer.
That's great. Support that.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Motion's on screen. Pardon? Yeah, well, item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. On the item? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Vice Chair Kelly. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the clerks for your outstanding work as usual. Thank you. Of course. Yes, of course.